I am going to introduce our special guest today, and she is Devaki Lindsey Berkson. She is truly, I would say, a hormone scholar and nutrition expert. She is known for connecting the dots of diverse research, teaching physicians as well as the public. She combined science with humor. Yes, Dr. Berkson started out with a master's degree in nutrition from Goddard, then went to Western States University with coeducation at National Naturopathic College, graduating with a chiropractic license from Western States from Oregon, where chiropractic physicians are primary care providers. She's triple board certified in nutrition, American Clinical Board of Nutrition, certified nutrition specialist, and applied clinical nutritionist. She has authored over 25 books. Her book on endocrine disrupting pollutants, Hormone Deception, is one of the early breakthrough books by McGraw-Hill. Safe Hormones is one of the first books on the science behind bioidentical hormones. Natural Answers for Women, Simon & Schuster, is the only guide on 220 conditions and how hormones play a role in incidence and treatment for women. She was a scholar at an estrogen think tank at Tulane University. Berkson trains doctors of all modalities in CEU courses and through seminars, books, and radio shows translates science into how the public can be better informed and entertained. And I am also going to add that we were at an event a number of years ago and we were chatting. I had just met Lindsay and we discovered that we went to the same high school. We grew up in the same neighborhood in the Chicago area and went to Mather High School together in the late 70s. So welcome, Dr. Berkson. It is such a joy to have you with us.
Thank you. I've been so excited to be here because nutrition is foundational. It's foundational. That's why after I got my degree in psychoneurobiology and then communication at the University of Michigan, my next degree was that master's in nutrition. And all of the rest of what I do has been based on adding nutrition. It is foundational for getting patients well. And your work that you do is so exciting with the hormone revolution that is now happening, but not everybody got the memo. And hormones cannot do what they do without phenomenal nutrition, which of course leans on digestion because you are what you digest, not just what you eat. You all know that better than almost anybody. So I'm excited when Sandy and I figured out that we went to high school at the same time. I think I'm just a little bit older than her. And we're still kicking and serving because we're impassioned by this. I got really excited to talk to you about the intimate link of hormones and nutrition that almost nobody knows about and you can know about. And if you wanted a niche practice to really augment as hormones really hit the fan. I mean, Halle Berry just did a presentation to a congressional session saying, hey, no doctors know about hormones or menopause anymore. We should raise $300 million of Americans' taxpayer dollars to get doctors that are trained teaching into schools because in the last 20 years, med schools stopped teaching about hormones, osteopathic schools, naturopathic schools. And in fact, Halle Berry when she presented to Congress, she said there's only been in 2023 one survey of OBGYNs to see what their background was in hormones. And only 31% of them had ever taken a course in hormones, and it was a 6-week course in hormones. So none of them know that hormones lean on nutrition. But I want to tell you why hormones are back. We're no longer frightened of them if you have a provider that's reading the science. And the next step is to really tend and caretake these hormones. You need to also work with a nutritionist to make sure that you get this done. So I'm kind of excited to build this back copy and have you understand what I'm talking about. And then I'll be very open to as many questions as you want. First of all, we used to think that hormones were mainly about reproductive and sexy things. So that's it. You only really have a problem if you've got problems with your reproductive cycle or PCOS or dysmenorrhea, menorrhagia, painful periods, heavy periods, or you only have a problem if you can't get pregnant, if it's a reproductive problem. So we kind of think of hormones as sexy or something to do with babies, or when you get older, if you don't have enough hormones, suddenly we have all kinds of jokes about women being irritable, hot flashes, etc. But we've discovered in the last 10 years that hormones are much, much more than just sexy, reproductive, and peri and post andropause. So covering all the bases, they're much more than that. So I want to explain what we now know about hormones, then say why we got away from hormones while we're back with hormones, and what hormones have to do with nutrition. So we used to think hormones were just about those things. So in the genre of sciences, the doctors that deal with hormones, or maybe the urologists with the guys, but not really all neurologists know hormones. I was just speaking. I saw someone was here from Greenville. I just spoke to a whole group of functional dentists in Greenville, and there was a urology symposium at the same hotel. And I got to talk to a lot of the urologists there, and they were saying how most of their colleagues know nothing about hormones, even though because of thinking it's mostly about reproduction and sexy stuff, men should go to a urologist about hormones, but most urologists aren't trained in hormones, let alone the nutrition that supports hormones. And then we also have OBGYNs, but you've just learned that OBGYNs don't know that much about hormones. 70% of them have never had a course in hormones. And also, they mostly, in terms of providing hormones, write scripts for birth control, which is a big debate. We could go on several hours about that. And then the other genre that deals with hormones are endocrinologists. But endocrinologists mainly deal with thyroid or hormonal changes, especially with the blood sugar regulating hormones. So we've adjudicated hormones to these tiny little genres of medicine where they really haven't been carrying the gauntlet. So most people think of hormones only when I get into perimenopause, do I need to take them? But now let me tell you about the new understanding of hormones, that they are more than just sexy, reproductive, or aging issues. So one of the reasons that we used to think that is the old thinking of hormones is that a hormone is produced in an organ somewhere in your body, like the ovary or the testes or your breast or your uterus or your adrenal gland. And then it rides in an Uber because the hormone is fat soluble and the blood is watery. So our highways of our blood are very watery. And if something's traveling through it that's lipophilic or loves fat, it's got to be on a binding protein. And that binding protein acts like a little Uber. So the hormone jumps on an Uber. Even thyroid jumps on an Uber. Estrogen jumps on an Uber. Testosterone, they jump in this Uber. They swim around and they look for what's called target tissues. And target tissues were the old way we thought of hormones, thinking that on target tissues there were lots of receptor satellite dishes. They're almost like a big malleable pocket, but we think of them as satellite dishes. So for example, your breast, we all know that there's a lot of hormonal activity in your breast. It's a big target tissue for all of the hormones. So think of all these satellite dishes or little birds' mouths waiting to be fed with hormones, because hormones are the only molecules in the body that can signal genes. No other molecules can signal genes, and genes are where all of our archival information from our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents lives, like a big library, and we need genetic input to be able to get things done in the body, and only hormones can do that. That's why they are so amazing, and you're going to learn how they're even more amazing. But all over the body, we have target tissues, but we used to think most of these target tissues were in sexy and reproductive places. So we thought of sexy target tissues as in the breast and in the ovary and in the uterus or in the prostate. We didn't really think much about, for example, hormones in the lungs or hormones in the brain or hormones in the muscles. We thought of them more that there were more target tissues in sexy tissues, and that's one of the reasons that we began to think that hormones were mostly in those domains, sexy, reproductive, and aging. But now we've learned that hormones can be produced all over the body by hormone producing enzymes. So, for example, we learned during COVID that the lungs make a lot of progesterone. They have a lot of progesterone producing enzymes, and they have a lot of progesterone target tissue. So they noticed that women who were younger and got COVID, women got more COVID, but they died less from it. So the incidence of COVID was higher in women, but the fatality incidence was lower. And then they discovered premenopausal women who got COVID died less, and postmenopausal women on hormones who got COVID died less, but older women not on hormone replacement, they had a higher fatality incidence. So they discovered that hormones have a lot to do with protecting the lungs and also protecting the immune system of all things. So there was a big study that took place at Cedars-Sinai where they took men because they saw that women did better with their female hormones, and they discovered that the lungs they have lots of these satellite dishes for progesterone, but they also have a lot of progesterone producing enzymes. So they thought, why don't we see if we give men, besides standard of care, progesterone? So they gave half men in the ICU with really severe COVID standard of care, and then they gave the other half of the men standard of care with 100 milligrams. They did it IM as a muscular injection of progesterone, BID, twice a day, and they tracked to see how they did when they got out of the hospital, the ground glass appearance, which is complications of damaged lung tissue, and if they had long COVID. And men who ended up taking progesterone along with standard of care got out of the hospital statistically in shorter period of time, had less ground glass appearance on the lungs, less damage to the lungs. None of them got long COVID. So hormones do a lot more of local tissue action. They're not just about sex and reproduction and aging. Well, then we started thinking, well, maybe hormones do a lot more things. So when we're young, we actually make progesterone in 6 different places in our brain. That's one of the reasons we sleep better when we're young. And some very forward-thinking physicians started thinking, why don't we try giving progesterone to traumatic brain injury patients? And there have been multiple, almost thousands of papers written about this because of these satellite dishes being all over the body, not just in the original target tissues, we're looking at hormones for a lot more influence over a lot more biologic real estate. But then we come back to this satellite dish. So I had the honor of my life has been ruined by hormones and saved by hormones. I don't think we have a long time to get into that whole story, but my mother was given diethylstilbestrol, which many pregnant women in Chicago, I was born at Michael Reese in Chicago, were given that, and it turned out to be the model compound of endocrine disruption. It was the most powerful synthetic estrogen ever made. It was 50 times more powerful than 17-beta estradiol. And the daughters born to women given that as injection in the first trimester had cancers and battled blindness. And that has been my fate, which got me into hormones because I ended up needing to really take care of them from the damage in utero. So I ended up writing that book, Hormone Deception. And based on that book, I was invited to work at the Center for Bioenvironmental Research at Tulane University, where I worked with Elwood Jensen, who discovered that first satellite dish, and he named it ER alpha for the first letter of the Greek alphabet. And then I also got to work with Yanaki Gustafsson from the Karolinska Institute, which is Sweden's version of Harvard. And he called his second receptor ER beta, and they were all looking at these satellite dishes and how they work to run tissue because only hormones can signal genes. The only other thing that can signal genes is vitamin D, which is why it's so infamous, because it's a vitamin, which means you have to make it, you can't make it, so you got to take it in on a regular basis. And we all know that regularity of supplementation of vitamin D is more effective than episodic supplementation of vitamin D. There's lots of papers on that, but vitamin D can also signal genes. So that's one of the reasons it's kind of an infamous kid on the block, is because it can do both. So at Tulane, Every year we put on estrogen conferences that used to be called Estrogens in the Environment. And the last 5 or 6 years, it was called E-dot hormone. And the last 2, 3 years of these E-dot hormones, they began to sound more and more nutritional and naturopathic. These are by the guys that discovered the receptors. Before Elwood Jensen, they used to think hormones worked by enzymatic reaction. They didn't know. And then Elwood said, wait a second, there's a receptor, and a hormone's made elsewhere in the body, travels throughout the body, and looks for that receptor. And that's really important. Only 3 people showed up at his very first lecture, and he ultimately was responsible for all the profiling in breast cancer and got the world's most respected Lasker Award. So you can be dismissed or you could be a traitor, based on the timing of when this information comes out. But then he and Yanaki got together and said, wait a minute, nutrition is like incredibly important in this story. So first of all, when a hormone is traveling in its Uber through the bloodstream, it's got to be able to be pulled out of the Uber and get into these binding pockets that are all about the signals of life. So they're real wide open, like a purse made out of buttery Italian leather that you can cram in your calendar and your iPad and your hairbrush. And it's got malleability to it. So all of these binding pockets, these messages of life that tell local tissues how to behave, because they can dive down into the genes and give genetic expression, you want to be able to be wide open. So inside these binding domains are all these nutrients that allow the hormone to signal. So first of all, zinc, and it's called a zinc finger. There's zinc fingers all over the body, and there are two atoms of zinc that do all kinds of interesting actions. And you've got zinc fingers all throughout your body, and there's so many ways that zinc interacts with hormones. I could give a long talk on that, but one of its big things is it pulls the hormone, in essence, out of the Uber and lets the hormone view the shape of the binding pocket and feel like it can go inside to do its job. So zinc is incredibly important. So a lot of times doctors who you will work with that are testing and treating hormone patients, they can debate till the cows come home the best way to test hormones. It could be saliva, 24-hour urine, spot urine, serum. There's many different ways to look at a hormone, but none of that will tell you its functionality. Is zinc being able to pull it out of the Uber? And then inside the binding pocket domain, you need vitamin A. Vitamin A is inside every single binding pocket domain. And this includes insulin, vasopressin, oxytocin, adrenal hormones, epinephrine. All of the hormones work this way, not just the sex steroid hormones. And so inside the binding pocket domain, you've got to have vitamin A, because vitamin A allows this binding pocket that's been shut down from genetic expression, the repressor action of it, to be turned on into an expressive action of it. So vitamin A is on every single binding pocket domain, which is the satellite dish that a hormone is looking for. And I know registered dietitians have a real difficult time. They're even told, be careful of your licensure because of vitamin A, because of some very old polar bear literature data where when polar explorers were stranded and they were having to kill polar bears for food, they ate the liver, which happens to be excessively high with vitamin A. And that ended up tainting a lot of the classical viewpoint of vitamin A. But you need vitamin A for every single hormone to express. So doctors can test levels of hormones, but they won't know if the hormone can really get into the receptor and do its thing. So what happens? Zinc pulls it in. Inside the binding pocket, we've got to have vitamin A for the genetic expression to occur. Then we need magnesium, which allows transcription of the message to occur. Then we need iodine, which maintains the architecture of the binding pocket domain. We know that in the thyroid. If you don't have enough iodine in your thyroid, it grows out of control into a goiter. Iodine is a growth controller, an architect controller, and it does the same thing in the binding pocket domain. And one of the other nutrients that we need in the binding pocket domain is pyridoxal 5-phosphate, the active form of pyridoxine hydrochloride, because the hormone zinc invites the hormone in for T into the satellite dish. Then there's enough vitamin A, which is translates to about 3,000 international units of vitamin A a day to accomplish all this. And then magnesium, which you want to keep your red blood cell magnesium in the high 5s or the low 6s. That's really the way to assess what's going on. But magnesium is constantly rinsed out of the body by any state of stress or toxicity or political duress that we're under. So it's very difficult. And as we age, it's harder and harder to keep these levels. So they're good for a nutritionist to track on a regular basis, because if the hormones your own body is making or the ones you're getting replaced won't work unless all these nutrients are in place. So pyridoxal 5-phosphate will, the hormone swims into the binding pocket domain. You've got all the nutrients available. There was nothing else sitting in there, so the hormone could get in. You know, if you're on an airplane and you want to go to the bathroom and you really, really got to go, and the bathroom says occupied. And in Italian, we've got someone here from Italy, occupato, occupato. Well, you can't get in. So if the binding pocket domains are filled with endocrine disrupting compounds, forever chemicals, bisphenol A, heavy metals, cadmium, and lead and so forth, and even the bully hormone cortisol. If we get really stressed, cortisol has a highest affinity for all binding pocket domains than any other hormone. And so it's always important for a nutritionist to do a 5-point salivary test on cortisol to understand where it is, so that the hormones can get in and interact with the nutrients, but they can't if the receptor is already occupatoed. But that's kind of a little bit of another discussion. So let's say it's mid-cycle and the woman's corpus luteum just squirted out some progesterone, and progesterone is hopped into an Uber and it's got its own little binding protein, and it's swimming around looking for target tissues with the satellite dish, and then it spies one and zinc pulls it in and it's available. Oh, good, it's available. It goes into the binding pocket domain along with the vitamin A and the iodine and the magnesium. It shimmies in space. So the ligand is the name of the hormone, is a global reference going into the receptor, or the lock and key is the old way of looking at it, shimming in space. That's the length of the duration of the signal. And B6 will close the hat on the binding pocket domain, which is helix 12, or open it up. And the movement of B6 and enough B6 adequately in local tissues rules the signaling duration of hormones, whether you've got, I hate that term, estrogen dominance, or you've got heavy periods, or you've got fibrocystic breasts. A lot of that is excessive estrogen signaling. And one of the issues is insufficient B6. So we have way too long of the signal going on instead of the optimal amount of the signal. In the olden days, we treated lumpy, bumpy breasts, cystic mastalgia, or painful periods with vitamin A, high doses of vitamin A and B6 and magnesium. And a lot of women got well. And now if we understand how the hormones really signal, which is what Yanaki and Elwood Jensen were saying, the last few EDOT hormones all sounded the importance of nutrients, the importance of herbs, and the importance of digesting what you eat so these nutrients can get into the binding pocket domain. Nobody knows about these bigger tapestry pictures of hormones. It's really kind of crazy. So hormones depend on nutrients to deliver their signals, which are the most important signals because they're the only ones that can really affect genetic expression. And now we learned that there's a second way that hormones signal. From Elwood, who actually was so cool. Elwood Jensen met his wife at a nudist colony. He let me know it over a drink when we were chatting, and I was in awe of him. And I learned that his wife had been a cabaret singer from Germany. So 1E hormone, we had all of the main big name professors and scientists in hormones. And I decided, why don't we rent a smoke-free cabaret and put on a whole hormone hip hop So she and I put on a whole hormone performance for all these guys, and we acted out how nutrition and digestion are necessary for hormones to work and how detox is a big component because as we have a more toxic world where we're exposed 24/7 in our air, food, and water, we've got binding pocket domains that are all occupadoed and clogged up with chemicals, which is why detox must move mainstream. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And I think down the road, hopefully, we'll have pre-pregnancy detox insurance reimbursed centers where people can do this because it's so important for hormones to work because they oversee all the genetic expression of the human genome. Well, so Elwood and Yanaki were the first ones to say, hey, hormones speak to this lock or this receptor, and nutrition is the middleman, and digestion is the foundation. But then it turns out that estrogen's the oldest hormone on the planet, the very first one. Actually, it was the receptor. Michael Bauer, who was my consultant, he's written all the chapters on estrogen in many of the medical books. He says that in the beginning, estrogen was so complex, we had the estrogen receptor, the satellite dish, before we really had the hormone. It's a very interesting story in Jawfish, but we don't have time to go into it. But because estrogen is the oldest hormone, way here before any other hormones were here, that's why women have larger, higher executive areas of verbality and of talking because estrogen has so many receptors. It's been around so long. It first has ER alpha, then ER beta, and now we've discovered another 4 or 5 receptors for estrogen, and they all do a variety of things. And everyone has been worried about estrogen because cancer is growth out of control. And yes, estrogen at times can promote growth, but now there's 6 known receptors. We think there's going to end up being about 12 or 14. They all have diverse actions, but the majority of those receptors, when signaled, control growth, don't promote growth. Only one receptor promotes growth 50% of the time, and all of the other receptors promote controlled growth to keep balance to the entire system. And nutrition plays a big role because whether you have chronic inflammation or not has a lot to do as to now we're learning which receptors express or don't express. So for a long time, nobody gave hormones much to think about. We thought they just affected by enzymatic reaction. We thought they were mostly about sexy reproductive aging things. But then about 10 years ago, we started to learn that hormones don't even totally need a satellite dish to send a signal. What? What? This was like big news, big, big, big news. It turns out that all hormones, parathyroid hormone, insulin hormone, estrogen hormone, your androgens from your adrenal gland, your androgens from your reproductive organs, all of these hormones don't totally need a receptor. At times, they can signal cell membranes, all cell membranes. Membranes, every single cell is surrounded by a trilipid layer membrane. And all hormones we now know can signal. So the hormones that signal into the satellite dish were the first way we learned that hormones signal genes. So it was called genomic signaling. A hormone comes from its uber, the zinc pulls it out of the uber, the hormone is available. There's iodine, there's B6, there's magnesium. It's shimming around in space, and there's just the right amount of pyridoxal 5-phosphate in the body. So then it opens up and the hormone swims away, gets back into the uber and goes away. That's the way that we've thought that hormones since 1986 worked all the way until 10 years ago. So we're in 2025. So about 10 years ago, we discovered that all of these hormones can go to a cell membrane. And I was a yoga teacher for many years. I lived in ashrams, and 7 is a very holy number, and we have 7 chakras that I'm aware of. And there's a lot of holiness in the body of things being repeated 7 times. So these hormones that hit the cell membrane, of all things, they go in and out, in and out, in and out of the membrane, the cell lipid membrane, 7 times, exactly 7 times. What is that about? Oh my God, that's so amazing. And as it's doing that, only if the cell membrane is healthy and the patient doesn't eat a lot of trans fatty acid foods and ultra processed foods that make for rigidity of cell membranes. And you can test the ratio of omega-3s to omega-6 to omega-9. And of course, macadamia nuts are the only food with omega-7s. I do like omega-7s. They're very anti-inflammatory in the dance and the balance of inflammation. But we learned that hormones not just signal in target tissue, but all membranes of the body, and they're instantaneous. And they call that non-genomic signaling because it isn't directly signaling the genes, but it indirectly signals the genes. And the parathyroid hormone is one of the fastest hormones in the body. The insulin hormone, of course, gives our body energy along with oxygen from the Krebs cycle. And all of these things now tell us that hormones signal target tissues, hormones signal all cell membranes, and we have all of our body hormone producing enzymes that keep making hormones peripherally, even when we're menopausal or even if we're a guy. And men and women have all the same hormones. They just have them in different ratios and at different times. But there's so much that a nutritionist can do. So now we've kind of established that hormones are global, but nobody knows this so bioidentical hormone replacement started in England in about the 1960s, and a really interesting OBGYN male doc. Most of the GYNs back then were male. It was very rare that a woman was an OBGYN. Now they're mostly OBGYNs, are female. And he came out with a book called Feminine Forever. And his name was Watson. And he said, if you want to really kind of live younger, longer, you need to keep estrogen in your body younger, longer. And it made sense to a lot of people, and doctors started writing scripts first in England, then it came over here in the United States. But in Europe, they used more natural hormones like estradiol. Our natural estradiol is called 17 beta estradiol. They used estradiol. They used an estrogen that's 1/8 the potency of estradiol, estriol. They don't use much testosterone over there, but most of the progesterone they use is natural progesterone. But we tend to be a country that's grown up with our government in tandem with big pharma. So when hormones came over to the United States, we started using synthetic versions of hormones. We used the biggest selling drug for many years because of what happened with Feminine Forever in England was called Prempro, which is a combination of horses' estrogen urine, and the term is Premarin, and it comes from pregnant mare's urine. That's why it was called Premarin. And it was mixed with the very first big synthetic progesterone that really hit the American market. So a lot of older American women were on it, and early birth control was made of this, which was called medroxyprogesterone acetate. But put those two together, and they just named the drug a shorter, cooler name called Prempro. And a lot of women were on that, and cardiologists were really behind it. They were giving women, if you've had a stent, you should go on hormones. If you just had a heart attack, you should go on hormones. If you have AFib, this was the stance before everything changed and people became fearful of hormones. So from England, we bit the hormone bug. In the United States, cardiologists jumped on the bandwagon. And at the height in the moving into the 1990s, we had about 22, 25 million American women on hormones. And in clinical practice, doctors were seeing that women, in fact, were younger, longer, and were having less aging issues. And people were all happy about this. And then what happened? Why did we become fearful of hormones? If they run the whole show, they signal target tissue, they signal now globally, they're intimate with nutrition and digestion. What the heck happened to make us all mostly feel like I'd rather age naturally? Hormones are dangerous. I don't want to risk my breasts. I'm going to cover my arms with my breasts because I'm scared to death of hormones, which is where we're kind of at now. So all the way up till early 1990s, people at the NIH and I used to think of prestigious institutions of Harvard, but now I'm no longer a fan of the term prestigious or because of a medical journal. I put everything into perspective because money runs a lot of things, and you've got to really know a lot of the back copy before you just read an abstract. But at that era, our powers that be that we give money to guide our health said we're an aging nation. And by 2030, 65% of Americans are going to be over 65. So we better figure out, since women live longer than men, how to keep them healthy so we don't topple Medicare. So the Women's Health Initiative was really started so we didn't topple Medicare. How do we take care of women? They live longer than men. What do we do with them so that not all our money gets siphoned to them? How do we keep them well? So they said, hey, we're giving women hormones. Cardiologists are recommending hormones. If you get AFib, God, it seems like hormones keep you younger longer. Let's do a randomized trial on hormones. So they initiated the Women's Health Initiative, which looked at women every which way. We could go, I wrote a book called Safe Hormones, Smart Women, which is the analysis of the Women's Health Initiative. And which I didn't. So the Women's Health Initiative took two groups of women, one only on Premarin, so estrogen, oral estrogen from a pregnant horse, the urine from a pregnant horse, and then they had another arm of the mixture of the synthetic progestin, medroxyprogesterone acetate, or Premarin. So together that was Prempro. So they had a group of about 8,000 women on estrogen orally and on Prempro, both things. And they were supposed to go for about 8 to 10 years. And at the 5-year mark, they started to notice that the women in the Prempro group that were getting both hormones were looking like they had a higher incidence of breast cancer and a higher incidence of clots and cardiac adverse events, which of course is the reason heart doctors were recommending hormones. So they went, oh my God, we are a very reactive society. This was the only one small randomized trial. And everybody in the United States, the lawyers got in on it. They started suing doctors that had recommended hormones to women who ended up getting cancer. And so over the period of the next 20 years, they kept following the women on estrogen only. And in the first several reanalyses, they didn't find a statistical event, but they found a trend that the women on only estrogen had less breast cancer. And then they kept reanalyzing women only on estrogen until they were on it they'd been on it for 5 years, but they tracked these women for up to 20 years. And at the 20-year mark, after 15 reanalyses had proved every single one, except the early one were non-statistically significant, but the next 15 were, women who were on estrogen for an average of 5 years had a 23% decreased incidence of getting breast cancer in the first place. It was protective against breast cancer. And if you did get breast cancer and you happen to be lucky enough to be on hormones, you had a 40% decreased fatality rate. Nothing had ever been that successful to protect your life. Like if Dr. Oz was on TV, if he was no longer in DC, and he said something could lower your risk if you get breast cancer, a fatality event by 40%, it was being sold at Walmart, all the shelves would be empty, because that's extraordinary. So in 2000, they prematurely stopped the studies because they thought early on that hormones were causing the very issues doctors were prescribing it for. But then early reanalyses started to show that there were lots and lots of issues with the studies. And in fact, the biggest issue came out by Hudis, who's a researcher I follow all the time. And he was able to show that estrogen is so breast protective that they forgot in the placebo group to ask, who of you have ever been on estrogen? And if you have, get out of the group, because you lowered our incidence of breast cancer in that group, and you made it look like the experimental group had more breast cancer when it was really the opposite. So the original authors of the Women's Health Initiative, there were two main events that brought hormones back. So after the early premature publication in July of 2002, there were headline news: hormones cause cancer, hormones cause clots and heart disease. Litigious lawyers jumped on it. Doctors in the United States threw out their prescription pads and threw out the hormone baby with the bathwater. Doctors in Europe said, those Americans, they're so reactive. We use natural hormones anyway. We're going to wait and see what things say. But all the reanalyses started showing that there were methodology issues. But we are so reactive, they stopped teaching hormones in med school. They stopped teaching hormones in osteopathic school, and they stopped teaching hormones in naturopathic school. And it's human to be down on what you're not up on. So when most women go to a well-intentioned doctor and say, am I a candidate for hormones? If you've not been trained in it, they're going to tell you, if I were you, if you were my wife, I'm not going to give you hormones. They can cause cancer because they don't really know all of this backstory. So in 2019, the original authors of the Women's Health Initiative, which there were prestigious from Brigham Young to Sloan Kettering to Johns Hopkins to MD Anderson, it was a major group that put this study together. They said, we're amending we were wrong. And they came out with a new analysis. And I remember I was lecturing at a group in front of 1,000 pharmacists at Caesar's Palace, and the study had just come out in December 2019. And I said, do you know that hormones are vindicated? They were vilified, but estrogen's back. She's back. And the whole group of pharmacists jumped up, and we were all jubilant because, of course, it's a big part of their concern is to keep us hormonally balanced. They're such great healers. But then the real big study, the biggest study that put hormones back on the map, which is why Halle Berry could go to government and say, we now need doctors in med schools teaching hormones, was our own 10 million study. And it was really the use of menopause hormone therapy for women over 65 in local tissues based on route, delivery, and dosage. So our government, our NIH, looked at 10 million older American women. That's me, I guess. I'm going to be 77 in a month. So they looked at women who were 65 and older who had been on hormones, and they found that women on estrogen, and most of the time women were on balanced hormones, so it wasn't just estrogen, lived 4 years longer. They had statistically less breast cancer, lung cancer, and colorectal cancer. They had done a non-peer-reviewed article that came out 2 years earlier, and they had 7 cancers that were statistically less. But when they went and added more women, so now it was the 10 million study. 2 years earlier, when it wasn't finished being peer-reviewed, it was a 7 million study. So we basically knew that hormones pretty much make women have less cancers. But the statistical ones are breast, the ones everyone's worried about, and then lung, and then colorectal. And yes, hormones protected against dementias and cognitive decline. It wasn't as strong, but it was statistically significant, and women had higher quality of life. And then they had a huge area where they looked at women with heart disease, because most cardiologists have been very nervous about giving women hormones because of they can cause clotting and cause this and cause that, when doctors had been using it quite a bit before the Women's Health Initiative. Well, they show that women with serious adverse cardiovascular history, so a heart attack or AFib or a stent, etc., these women did much better and died less if they too were on hormones. Well, that brought hormones back, but now we've got a whole group of doctors and providers that are not trained in hormones. In come the nutritionists who understand that hormones need all these nutrients, that hormones need available binding pocket domains. And so it's a whole new world about how we're now going to start using hormones again. It's not only going to be for sexy reproductive aging things, but also for local tissue advantage. The gut is entirely lined by hormones. The pancreas is lined by hormones. The liver is lined by hormones. The brain is exceptionally lined by hormones. That's why my last book was called Sexy Brain, because the sex steroid hormones give volume and neuroplasticity. And a lot of us in the hormone space, I'm on the staff of the Institute of Bioidentical Hormone Medicine, and we're constantly doing research and having grand rounds every week and meeting and looking at the literature and sharing what's happening clinically. But there's such a role with nutrition, and this is something that hardly anybody talks about, knows about. Is there any other point that I wanted to make here? And I think that's enough. I can probably insert some of the things, but that gives you an idea just to summarize it up. Hormones are the most powerful signaling molecules that we have. They can signal target tissue, and they can signal cell membranes. Cell membranes depend so much on diet. If you have rigid cell membranes, you lose all those non-genomic rapid signaling system. You also need to eat quality food and digest it well, because you need zinc and vitamin A and iodine and pyridoxal 5-phosphate, which of course the modern world is the enemy of pyridoxal 5-phosphate. Alan Gaby wrote a phenomenal book on that, one of my best friends. Just jet fuel, if you fly around a lot, it just rinses P5P right out of your body. Sugar rinses P5P. It's really it's been the regular world is kryptonitic against B6, and it's a big deal for a nutritionist to keep B6 because now it controls the optimal duration of hormone signaling in the body. It's really huge, but there's so many nuances of B6 since it's so bioavailable and so poorly excreted out of the kidneys. You can't take too much of it. Over 100 milligrams a day is linked to reversible neurologic issues. So we always have to be careful with it, but very few people really know how to work with it except trained nutritionists. So I think it's a whole new world. Hormones are back. They don't cause breast cancer. In fact, they protect against it. I just gave a 16-hour 18-hour CME course for medical doctors, nurse practitioners, NDs, and PAs with Dr. David Brownstein called Everything Hormones. And we're going to give in April of 2026 the first ever course on treating breast cancer with hormones and nutrition, and it's all online. So we're diving into this because we feel that people have been fearful and ignorant of it, and who miss out but our patients, and especially women. Women are always battered about by all these reactive ways that medicine goes about things. And so I love that you can get educated and see if you get a fire in your belly to enjoy this and want to carry the gauntlet to help women know how to do this more.
This has been fabulous, and I know that we have people very, very interested in this topic, and we are going to be focusing on this because as a health coach, how you can educate clients, how you can educate the world about this, because there's so many myths and so many misconceptions. So we've got a lot of questions. We probably won't get to all of them. I just want to say at the beginning that this is not prescriptive, that we are not here to give any personal advice or recommendations or diagnoses, but just jumping right in. What would you say someone 65, never been on estrogen, starting hormone therapy? Is it too late? And what would be an alternative? Like she says, estrogen cream, would that be an alternative? What would you say if you're
I love that
over
question
65?
because there's a really wrong book out there, called The Estrogen Window. And I think we met when we met at that thing. The author was there, and I had him on my podcast, but there were so many holes in what he said. It was one of the rare podcasts I recorded and I didn't publish because he was just so off the mark. So you can actually start hormones at any age. There is no estrogen window. And so I have a licensure where I can't be prescribing, but my whole career I've worked in medical practices where I've worked collaboratively. So I have worked with prescribing along with a team for the majority of my career. And we have put women in their late 90s on hormone replacement therapy, reduce the amount of medications that they're on, and given them a life where they're no longer socially isolating and doing much better. So it's never too late to start hormones. And how you take hormones into your body is called the delivery mode. And there's a variety of delivery modes, and they all have their pros and cons. But and cream works, but there's many, many types of creams. We refer to them as bases. And there's a lot of nuances with that. But understand and think in your mind that every time someone applies a hormone, whether they swallow it or rub it in or take it through the first vaginal pass, they need to be able to digest well. They need to have available receptors, which depends on detox, and they need those nutrients. So they need this kind of nutritional education to live right, eat right, detox right, to keep their hormones signaling. And almost no one knows this information. This is very new information. Plus, I had the honor of hanging out with Elwood Jensen and Yanaki for so many years. And honestly, they sound like naturopaths, even though they're PhD scientists. Okay. So
Awesome. Okay, so regarding diet, is it essential to follow consistently a meal plan every day for a certain period of time? Some people, she says, don't see results because they stick to it like Monday to Friday, let themselves go on the weekend. Then they claim that functional nutrition isn't really effective. What would you say? You have to be really consistent. Can you go hog wild on weekends and have cheat days?
it depends on your condition of your health, really. If you're so I deal now with a lot of breast cancer patients. That's who I have 65 active breast cancer patients at the moment. These are people at stage 3, stage 4. They wouldn't have heard about me, right? I mean, they have to be really failed a lot of things to find somebody as kind of out of the box as me. So they have to be extremely strict because they're fighting for their lives. But the average person, you don't need to put someone on something so restrictive. You want to put someone on a program that they can live with and do and enjoy. And that'll vary from person to person. Some people like being told exactly what to do, and other people like a little bit of more, I like a little bit of more loosey-goosey. It depends on the patient. But I don't think many people need very strict meal plans, or they need more generalizations. Otherwise, you start losing people. And what you want to do is inspire people.
Absolutely. So do you believe dosing for symptoms or dosing in a therapeutic range? So estrogen levels, some say over 50 for bone, brain, cardiac health. If you like a certain blood level, what range do you like to see for estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone? Again, keeping in mind that there's no one size fits all, and we are not making personalized recommendations here.
We have to constantly do all that stuff. Well, first of all, most reference ranges are ridiculous because they're based on millions of unhealthy Americans, and they're also based on reference ranges of someone your age. And you really want, if you're using hormones as anti-aging hormones, I'm using them as anti-aging. I want my blood to reflect the blood of a 25, 30-year-old woman. I don't want it to reflect the blood of a 76-year-old woman. And that's the problem, is doctors aren't trained to do that. Doctors are trained to go, they're never taught labs. I mainly teach doctors now. I mainly lecture to doctors, and they all bemoaned me. We don't know anything except we're told stay within the reference ranges. They don't even understand exactly what that means, except under the reference range, something's wrong, and over the reference range, something is wrong. But you want blood that looks like the blood more of a younger woman and as a man of a younger man. That's one of the big issues. Guys ask their regular doc to test their testosterone. He tests it. He goes, "You're fine for a guy your age." Well, you don't want to be a guy your age. You want to turn back the Mack truck of time. Now, there's a debate about levels. And really what you want is you want enough hormone in you that your hippocampus, where your sense of self and memories live, where that stays volumized and neuroplastic. And Yale did an incredible study, because most people say, if Mother Nature meant for me to stay younger longer, she'd keep my hormones going. So I'm not going to do any of this. I'm going to eat well and exercise and meditate, and I'm just going to, age gracefully. Well, I could say I'm born with bad eyes and this is my lot in life. And I don't think God meant for me to see, so I'm not going to wear glasses. But if I wear glasses, this is better living through science and chemistry, and we can do that with hormones. So Yale wanted to know about this too, because the real anti-aging deal is what maintains the volume or revolumizes a shrinking hippocampus. That's where anti-aging, it's either at turning down the mTOR system, which is a whole nother discussion, and the volume of your hippocampus, because that's where your 3Ms live: your sense of self or me, your memories, and your motivation. That's where the 3Ms, the 3 M&Ms live. And the minute your hippocampus starts to shrink, you start to feel older and frail. So they said, well, what does great living do for the hippocampus? Let's test it. Because we know that hormones, through the work of various universities like McGill University at their Department of Psychiatry, I got real excited because this woman, for her PhD thesis, took aging people and did functional MRIs, showed that their hippocampi were shrinking, and gave women estrogen and men testosterone. And in about 6 weeks to 4 months, their hippocampus revolumized and they stood up taller, walked better, had quicker speech. they operated better because we're very in sync with the size and functionality of our hippocampus. So Yale said, let's take people, we'll do a study called the MED-X studies. MED stands for meditation and X stands for exercise. So they got these people exercising an average of 3.5 hours a week, and they had them meditating like 3.5 hours a week. It was a lot of meditation, it was a lot of exercise, and they had dietary guidelines. And they tracked these people for a year, and they had shrinkage of the hippocampus just like everybody does. You shrink about 1% a year unless you're on hormones. Then you stop the shrinkage and you start reversing the shrinkage. The only other thing that's ever been linked to reversing the shrinkage of the hippocampus is some of the nutrients that help hormones signal. So there's one study where if you take enough magnesium and you keep it up in the higher red blood cell level quartile, like in the high 5s or low 6s, that the hippocampus started to revolumize because the hormones need, that's why you have more zinc in your brain than almost any other tissue except your prostate and your other hormonal tissues, because hormones rule the brain. And a lot of us in the hormone space feel if we had more nutritionists and hormone specialists guiding patients, we wouldn't have the epidemic of Alzheimer's disease. We would end it. But nobody talks about hormones because everybody's looking for the expensive drug, and they hope that they have their name on the patent with it, you know, because that's the way we're guided. So I hope that answers that question. But so serum, the biggest thing you want to look at is your FSH. That tells you if the hormones that you're on are really anti-aging you. So as a woman gets older, her FSH goes up and down during perimenopause, so you can't totally depend on it. But as you really are in menopause, it's elevating. And all of the symptoms of aging, weight gain on your middle, thinner bones, brain fog, all of that, low sex steroid hormones drive aging, and elevated FSH drives aging, follicle stimulating hormone. Before the GLP-1 medications hit the market as these major weight loss miracles, companies were looking at monoclonal antibodies against FSH because if you blocked it, you could lose weight better. High FSH, you can't lose weight. High FSH, your bones can't get well no matter what you do. You have to bring your FSH down. So we guide our estrogen to the point where we bring the FSH to a level that is 25 or less in women and 12 to 13 or less in men. And this is a game changer. I learned this from Angela DeRosa, who teaches hormones in her own way. Every doctor kind of translates their feel of what hormones are about. But the FSH is the bomb more than the numerical value of the estrogen. Because if a woman's been on hormones and she said, I'm not really getting anywhere and I'm not losing my love handles and I'm, you know, my bones, I'm thinking of getting that Beniva shot that Sally Fields says dances around about. What should I do? You got to bring that FSH down because it causes all those issues. But most doctors don't know about that. So now you do. Now you know about that.
Well, we are just about out of time. We
Oh,
had so
boo.
many questions that came in. Dr.
Is there a way
Berkson,
I can send some?
we are
Is
going to
it
have to have you back. We can go.
okay? Okay.
Are you available? We can go like maybe 5 minutes
Sure,
past time. Okay.
I can go more.
Okay. So we've got,
Because
and
I
I
hate not to answer some more questions while we're all
Okay,
here.
so we've got this just came in, and many we are going to skip. I'll ask some questions about PCOS and thyroid, but we are talking about BHRT and sex hormones, so we will leave that for another day. But regarding hysterectomy, for those who've had that, we think of hormone balance, somebody in perimenopause, menopause, for those that might have a hysterectomy, what would you say?
So it all depends on the age.
Dangers of hormone depletion is what she's asking.
Yeah, it's a reality. That is a great question. This is a great question. And this is something, so, you know, there's an average of about 600,000 hysterectomies a year. And, you know, you can debate that, the causal reason, that's a whole nother deal. But once a woman doesn't have any of her equipment, it really depends on her age at which and also the reason. But we are seeing younger and younger women go into premature hypothalamic failure more than ever before because of endocrine disruption in the womb, which is why we need detox prior to pregnancy. And we need our nutritionists. We need you guys to really focus on detox. But, I just lost so what were we talking about? I lost my thread.
We're talking about the dangers of hormone depletion for
Okay,
women,
great.
particularly, yeah, they might have had a hysterectomy.
So the issue is age. The issue is age. If you lose your hormone capability, whether it's through chemo, whether it just seems to happen, and which I have an interesting story of patient with that in a minute, but if you lose your ability to have your regularity of cycle reflects your health. The more regular your cycle, the better your health. We have more and more young women with irregular cycles and going into menstruating earlier and going into perimenopause, even in their 20s. Everything is off kilter because of a lot of chemicals in the placenta, in the amniotic fluid, in mother's milk, and in the world. So if you lose your menstruation, at 45 years or earlier, Mayo Clinic has done one of the premier studies on this, showing that a woman who loses all her estrogen from her gynecologic equipment from 45 years or younger and doesn't go on hormones has an increased risk of a first fatal heart attack. And the risk is huge. I don't remember the exact percentage of it, but it's a pretty famous study from the Mayo Clinic. And I talk to women a lot about it. Like, for example, if a woman comes into me and she went into chemo in her 30s and she stopped menstruating, or they want to put her on tamoxifen for something, you've got to do things to really protect the heart because their heart is really at risk. So knowing this information is big. And sometimes women will get one ovary removed, but once you've had any pelvic surgery and you've had one ovary removed, then the other ovaries don't tend to work as well. So anyone who has had pelvic surgery, even if it's just been endometrial implant removals for endometriosis, you want to look at their FSH. You want to look at, we can't be going into diagnosing or anything, but you really want to know, is this woman need some more estrogen to really keep her safe over her next few decades and protect her life? So this is a big issue. Many people are caught in this, and most doctors aren't aware of the importance of hormones, but that age is a big difference. Doesn't mean you don't need hormones if you get a total hysterectomy after age 45, but the women 45 and younger, it's life-threatening if they don't get on hormones. And this is well established and it's been replicated. So whenever you have a study that's replicated by an independent laboratory somewhere else, it gives more holy grail, heaviness to it. So I hope that was helpful. That's a fabulous question. It comes up all the time, and most women have nowhere to go. They get a hysterectomy, they gain 30 pounds, they hate themselves, their life goes downhill. And part of getting them well is diet, but another part of it is bringing that FSH down with the doctor, that you're working with, and really trying to get more life in their blood with more balanced hormones.
Absolutely. So I am going to summarize and pool together a couple questions because we had some come in. Let's say someone's been on HRT. What about fiber, exercise? And then for those vitamins and minerals, do we have to test? Can we just say, take a supplement for these? So pulling those together.
Those are great questions. Yeah. First of all, so in my book, Safe Hormone Smart Women, which I hope to be having a new sequel coming out soon, but because that came out in 2010, but because it was an analysis of the Women's Health Initiative. In fact, when the reanalysis came out in 2019, the first thing I did was pull my book off the shelf and read the whole thing to see if it was in sync with the reanalysis. I was like, oh my God, it was. So thank God it was in sync. They talk a lot about fiber. So women who, in the Framingham study and in the nurses studies, which of course have this huge body of information tracking Americans over time, the highest incidence of breast cancer is in Long Island and in Dartmouth. Those are where we have 1 out of 6 women, 1 out of 7 women getting breast cancer instead of the national 1 out of 7.5, 1 out of 8. And they discovered in those pockets of women that the women that ate the most fiber, they had the least amount of breast cancer, even though they were living in a locality that made them more vulnerable to breast cancer. So fiber helps the body process estrogen. You make estrogen, use it, and poop it out. You make estrogen, use it, and poop it out. A big part of estrogen homeostasis is, if we had more time, is transit time and making sure that you don't build up and re-release estrogen back into the system so you overwhelm the system. So pooping, there's in my new course in April, I'll go into the research where they tracked almost 10,000 women over almost 10 years, looking at how many times they went to the bathroom, and they did nipple aspiration and looked at the nipple fluid and abnormal cells. And women who have 2 poops a day never had any abnormal cells, and then they didn't go on to get breast cancer. If they pooped once a day, 5% of them had abnormal cells. If they missed a day, you should never miss a day. If in an intake history somebody misses a day, they found up to 50% abnormal breast cells, which when they tracked the women over another 10 years, that was the group of women that had the higher rate of breast cancer. So fiber and transit time have a lot to do with keeping hormones behaving and acting for us rather than against us. And then the other question was, it was fiber, and there was one more.
Fiber, exercise, and then do we need to test for all those vitamins and minerals you mentioned, or can you just go on a supplementation?
That's another great question. Well, part of it, the thing of it is just because someone swallows something doesn't mean it gets to their cells. So in the beginning, you want an idea about how well is this person sitting in front of me, really using what they choose to go buy, cook, eat, and digest. How well is it getting out to their cells? And there's signs of that. You can do a nutritional physical. When Dr. Wright was my first mentor and he first taught me about nutritional physicals, you could look at things and get a little bit of an idea. But now we have a lot of sophisticated nutritional testing. And I think it makes a lot of sense to get an idea if somebody is digesting by measuring those nutrients. But in my practice early on, for at least the first 15, 20 years, I had a Heidelberg gastric analysis machine, which is the state-of-the-art stomach acid testing to see parietal cell, which makes a stomach acid efficiency. But the parents died and left the business to their sons, who drove it into the ground. And now the gastroenterologist that I'm putting on a gut symposium at the end of next year called Everything Gut, he's going to try and revive the Heidelberg gastric analysis. If I was a nutritionist, I'd want to talk to the owner of the clinic and see if you could revive a way to replicate the gastric analysis test, or at least do stomach acid challenge testing. Do they make enough stomach acid? I just got tested with the last capsule that was in existence, and I'm 76 and I still make enough stomach acid, but most people 76 don't. And you want to know where their pancreatic enzymes are at. So, a comprehensive stool test gives you a pancreatic elastase, and it also gives you a steatorrhea, which is there fat in the stool, and there shouldn't be too much fat. These are all things that give you an idea, how well is this patient absorbing, and also the total protein. It should be in the 7s. If the total protein is, as we age, we don't make as many digestive players, and it starts going down in most people who age. I keep mine around 7.4 because I'm digesting. But if you get a younger person and their protein is 6.4, 6.0, something's wrong. These are little signs of not digesting. So there's functional blood signs of not digesting. There's a physical, but it's always nice to get some testing. But as a nutritionist, you really want to know, is this person absorbing? What are they insufficient in that are digestive players? And what is their transit time and their poop like? Because all of this is so foundational, and nobody, even gastroenterologists, don't hardly talk about this with their patients, but they do with their nutritionists. Yay.
Yes, and they do with their health coaches as well.
That's what I meant.
We're all
Your
working
health coaches.
together. So, we can go on for hours and hours. Thank you so much. This has been phenomenal. We've had incredible comments that have come in.
Yeah, what are some of your comments? Can you just give me a few?
You are amazing, Dr. Berkson. Thanks so much.
I've just been around so long. I've been in practice 54 years.
So,
oh my God.
We've had some great and wonderful questions. I'm sorry we could not get to them all for the sake of time, but we're going to have you for a return engagement so we can get all of these answers. And there was a question that came in about what courses, resources. follow Dr. Berkson. She has a lot of resources, her books, her courses, and at FMCA, we are going much, much further in this topic. It is something that I'm quite passionate about, given everything that Dr. Berkson said. We need to educate so many women, and I have to say in closing, I am a year younger than Dr. Berkson.
Doesn't she look fabulous?
A year ago, I went on BHRT. I said, I'm doing it. I'm going to be an experiment to see what'll change, what'll work. Is it possible in your 70s? And many doctors are putting people on hormones, even at my age and older. So
I had breast cancer 32 years ago because I'm a DES daughter, and all the daughters got breast cancer within these 2 years because of epigenetic changes in the womb. Many, many, many DES daughters got breast cancer between the ages of 45 and 47. So I did. And 2.5 years later, I went on hormones. So I've been on hormones for almost 30 years now, which is why I still lecture 9 and 15 hours a day. And you really can achieve being younger longer. There's no doubt about it. And I eat well and do many, many, many other things. But I'm on a lot of hormones for a long time. And every time I see my breast cancer doctor, every single time, and she's aged right in front of my eyes. She's 25 years younger than me, and she looks now 25 years older than me. And every time I've seen her, because they have the best hands to palpate you, and I didn't want to get mammograms every single year, she would say to me every single year, you look better than any other breast cancer patient I have. You got to get off of hormones. That's been the mantra. So now we know that mantra is not necessarily true.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who came. And we will, one way or another, we will get all these questions answered. Come to the more Ask the Experts. And again, thank you so much. You're wonderful. It's been a delight.
Blessings to you, Sandy. You're amazing with what you've done. I'm so proud of you. And yay, Chicago. Yay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
May the hormonal force be with us.
Yeah.